The Middle Ages are often remembered as a time of knights, castles, and holy faith. Yet hidden beneath those tall towers and ringing bells was a darker world. Inside dungeons stood strange iron devices, cruelly crafted not to bring quick death, but to slowly unmake the human spirit. They were not symbols of protection or order, but weapons of control. Every spike, every hinge, every chain had one purpose: to remind people that pain could always be made worse. And in that shadow, fear itself became the true ruler of the age. These creations were whispered about in villages, sketched in secret on fading parchment, and recalled only in fearful memory. Their true strength lay not only in the agony they caused, but in the fear they spread to all who heard of them. Even the rumor of their use kept crowds obedient. Tonight, we will descend into the forgotten chambers of medieval Europe, where silence often roared louder than screams. Once you learn of them, you will never see that age the same way again, and perhaps you'll wonder how fear itself became the sharpest weapon of all. To understand these nights, we must first understand power itself. By day, rulers staged parades, decrees, and sermons meant to impress the masses. But the night told a different story. Night was for truth. Behind guarded doors, emperors, sultans, and kings shed their masks. The shadows of palaces became playgrounds of suspicion, where whispers outweighed swords, trust was fragile, and loyalty constantly tested. In this darkness, real power did not roar, it whispered, sharper and more dangerous than steel. What did rulers fear most? Not rebellion or armies, but betrayal, the silent dagger of someone they trusted. To guard against it, they created secret rituals, midnight trials, and ceremonies of silence where loyalty was tested. Picture a torch flickering on damp stone walls, footsteps echoing through endless corridors. In those whispers, fate shifted, nations bent, not by war, but by fear carried in the stillness of night. And in that silence, crowns weighed heavier than any sword. And so, torture devices and rituals of fear became the hidden tools of control. They were not brought out each day, yet their shadow never left. The sight of an iron chair, the faint rattle of chains, or even the rumor of what happened in the dungeons was enough to silence defiance before it began. Power did not need to strike constantly, it lived in the imagination, in the memory of screams, muffled by stone walls, echoing long after the torchlight had faded. In truth, fear itself became the strongest weapon a ruler could ever wield. So let us step into those chambers of dread, where pain was transformed into theater, silence into law, and cruelty itself became a tool of order. These devices were not forgotten because they failed, but because they succeeded all too well. They carved obedience into bone and memory, ensuring submission across generations. Their very names were enough to command silence, their presence a lesson no one dared challenge. Centuries later, their shadows still linger, whispering that true power was never in crowns or swords, but in the fear these creations left behind. Now, we begin. Those who faltered were quietly removed, their names erased from scrolls, their lives stricken from memory itself. This was a fate worse than execution, for death ends a body, but erasure ends a legacy. What is life, if history pretends you never walked its path? The pharaoh's knights did not celebrate loyalty, they demanded it, suffocating every breath with expectation. Fear wrapped itself around devotion, like iron gripping flesh, a reminder that, even in silence, the price of doubt was eternal disappearance. Erased faces, erased names. This was a punishment that bled far beyond the victim. Generations carried the weight of absence, children taught never to whisper the names of the condemned. Entire families became shadows, living reminders of vanished bloodlines. Such rituals twisted loyalty into terror, and devotion into chains stronger than iron. Pharaohs reigned not only through gold or armies, but through silence itself and unspoken law that even memory could be outlawed, and forgetting became the harshest command of all. So I ask you, what is worse? To die beneath the sun where all may see, or to vanish in the shadows, erased so completely that even history itself denies you ever lived? Death ends a life, but erasure ends a legacy. The pharaoh's midnight rituals ensured loyalty through terror, weaving obedience into silence. Yet they also left behind echoes that still chill the imagination, whispers that remind us how power feared being forgotten as much as the people feared disappearing. And in that silence, the shadows spoke louder than words. Perhaps that is why their legacy still lingers in the darkest corners of history. Now let us travel to Rome, a city of grandeur, marble, and, lo yet, within the emperor's private chambers, law often bent to the ruler's whim. Emperors like Caligula and Nero were infamous not only for their decrees, but for their private spectacles. These were not the vast public games of the Colosseum that thrilled the masses, but smaller, darker gatherings, cloaked in wine, torchlight, and fear. Behind closed doors, courtiers trembled. For every glance, every laugh, every silence could seal their fate. Banquets became trials, each cup of wine and platter of food hiding silent judgment. Nobles arrived smiling, but their hearts trembled beneath their robes. One glance at the wrong moment, one hesitant word, or a laugh that rang too loud could bring disgrace, exile, or worse. At these tables, power was not something to be enjoyed, it was sharpened like a blade, tested against every soul present, ready to cut the moment weakness appeared. And as the torches flickered, every guest wondered who would be next. Wine spilled across marble floors, laughter cracked the air, and eyes darted nervously between shadows. Every gesture was a test, every word a gamble, for in those chambers even silence spoke volumes. Would you survive such a night? Could you mask your true thoughts while an emperor's gaze weighed every breath you took? Many could not, and for them, a night that began with music and feasting ended in their final humiliation, proof that in Rome, terror often wore the mask of celebration. These private trials were not meant as mere entertainment. They were deliberate reminders that the emperor's reach stretched far beyond daylight proclamations or battlefield victories. Rome was not ruled by armies alone, but by a constant fear sown in whispers, in silences. In the sudden hush of a banquet hall, when eyes turned toward the emperor, in those moments, honor could be stripped away before peers, leaving nobles broken not by sword or exile, but by humiliation that lingered longer than wounds. In Rome, silence itself became the sharpest weapon of all. Far across deserts, Islamic caliphs shaped nights in ways unlike any empire. These were not wild feasts or drunken revels, but silent courts hidden beneath domes of stone. It is said that some caliphs summoned poets, scholars, generals, and even rivals to stand before them under the glow of swaying lanterns. In that silence, every word became a blade. A single poem offered in brilliance could bring honor and fortune. Yet one poorly chosen verse, one trembling phrase, could doom not only the speaker, but their family for generations. Here, words were not mere sounds, they were sentences. Far across deserts, the caliphs of great empires shaped nights in their own image. These were not wild feasts or drunken revels, but silent courts lit by dim lanterns, where every breath seemed to echo. Poets, scholars, and rivals stood before the throne, their voices trembling as words were weighed like treasure. One verse could bring wealth, yet one misplaced line could doom a family forever. In such halls, silence itself became the truest defense. To speak brilliantly could mean sudden fortune, a life elevated by a single phrase. But to falter, even for a heartbeat, brought disgrace, exile, or quiet death in the shadows. In these courts, silence itself became the wisest answer, for words could bind or kill as surely as chains. The caliph's midnight chambers remind us power was not always in swords or armies. Sometimes it rested in one trembling verse, one whispered line that could decide destiny itself. And in that silence, fear spoke louder than any decree. Scholars trembled, poets hesitated, and entire families waited sleepless through the night. For a caliph's judgment was final, and dawn often carried whispers of names erased from records, fortunes stripped away, and legacies shattered beyond repair. In this theater of silence, fear was etched deeper than any blade. For wounds of steel might heal, but wounds, carved by uncertainty and dread, could last for generations. And in that silence, power spoke the loudest of all. Now let us ride east, to the vast Mongolian steppes, where endless skies stretched above and winds carried the scent of conquest. The Khans ruled with terror and thunder, yet their nights were storms of a different kind. Whispers speak of gatherings inside the Khan's great tent, lit by fire and shadow, where the wives of conquered foes and rival nobles were summoned. They were not invited for comfort or celebration, but displayed as living trophies of domination, symbols that the Khan's power reached beyond the battlefield into bloodlines and honor itself. These were not nights of joy or feasting. They were living declarations. I own your land, your bloodline, your future. Each act was not simply cruelty, it was strategy, carving humiliation not only into individuals, but into entire nations whose pride shattered under the weight of submission. Imagine standing before the Khan, the air heavy with smoke and silence, not knowing if you would walk away with honor, with shame, or vanish entirely into the shadows of history. And tell me what legacy could survive such nights. Here, power was raw, unpolished, unmasked. It did not disguise itself with temples or poetry, nor soften itself with ritual. It thundered openly, declaring with every gesture, I am Khan, and you are nothing but the proof of my conquest. The crackle of fire, the weight of silence, the bowed heads of nobles all became instruments in this theater of domination. For the Mongols, night was not for rest, nor even for fear alone. It was for breaking bloodlines, bending legacies, and stamping eternity with their name. So I ask, would you survive such a summons? Would your name be remembered with honor, or swallowed in silence, erased before dawn like so many others? In these courts of domination, survival itself was no guarantee of peace, for even those who walked away carried scars of humiliation, of loyalty forced, of fear that clung like a shadow long after the torches burned out. In truth, sometimes survival felt far worse than death. A single torch sputtering out in the dark, its smoke curling like a fading memory. In medieval Europe, castles too became stages of fear. Behind thick stone walls, kings and queens summoned nobles for whispered confessions. Secrets traded under the flicker of a single torch. Sometimes, courtiers were drawn into rituals of humiliation, stripped not of titles but of dignity, their pride unmade before the crown. These were not moments of justice, but performances of control acts meant to remind every lord and lady that their status was fragile, their honor borrowed. Mercy, in such halls, was not a right to claim. It was a fragile gift, granted only at the ruler's whim, and it could vanish in an instant. Imagine kneeling in a vast torchlit hall, confessing sins you may never have committed, your voice trembling as stone walls echoed each word. Above you, the crown stared coldly, not with mercy but with calculation, weighing your worth in silence. The throne before you was not merely a seat of power, it was a cage, binding both ruler and ruled in chains of suspicion. Every breath became a test, every pause a danger, for in those moments, even innocence could be twisted into guilt by the will of the sovereign. For in those chambers, loyalty was not measured by victories on the battlefield, but by absolute submission in silence. To falter, even for a heartbeat, meant disgrace that clung to a family's name for generations. To resist meant utter ruin, a fall from which no title or wealth could shield you. The medieval knight carved one lesson into the hearts of every courtier. You did not merely serve the crown, you belonged to it, body and soul, your fate turning with its cold and watchful gaze. Do you see the pattern? From Egypt's echoing temples to Rome's golden feasts, from the silent courts of caliphs to the stormy tents of Mongol Constantine, was the true stage of power. By day, rulers appeared as gods, radiant and untouchable. But when shadows fell, they revealed their fragility, their paranoia, their desperate hunger for control. In the dark, masks slipped, and fear reigned more strongly than crowns. And in that darkness, the truth of power was laid bare. Those who served them lived on the edge of terror, never certain which night might be their last. For one careless word, one fleeting glance, one stumble in the shadows, could erase lifetimes of loyalty and honor. Entire families could be condemned by a single misstep, their names wiped away as though they had never existed. History, it seems, was not written in daylight victories, but in midnight silences, moments of fear so heavy they broke stronger than swords, leaving scars no crown could heal. So what do we make of these forbidden nights? Were they acts of governance, carefully staged to secure obedience, or were they theater meant to dazzle and terrify in equal measure? Were they true celebrations of strength or fragile masks, worn by rulers desperate to hide their own fear of betrayal? Perhaps they were both, intertwined in ways history still struggles to untangle. Perhaps the truth itself still lies sealed behind walls of stone, buried in silence, waiting for the right moment to whisper again through the centuries. But one thing is certain, history is not written only in daylight triumphs. It is whispered in shadows, in secrets carried from chamber to chamber, from one fearful generation to the next. When you picture kings and emperors, do you see only shining crowns, golden halls, and banners in the wind, or do you also hear the echoes of nights you were never meant to know, the silences that weighed heavier than steel? Remember, the past is darker, stranger, and more haunting than legend dares to admit. Subscribe and walk with me again into history's hidden chambers, where whispers have never truly died.